I don't know how I expected to be told my son had like cancer, but it wasn't how it happened. Like I thought they'd sort of like sit you down and like hold your hand but this doctor just was like, yeah, your son's got leukemia and we need to get him to and I was like what? And I think your world literally does just stop. And then I remember like he was talking at me, but I wasn't processing anything he was saying because all I could think about was, oh my God, I've got to go and tell my mum, and my mum is going to feel like this. And then I've got to tell Rich, and he's going to feel like, and repeat to all our friends and family because I literally just felt like the ground had swallowed me up. And what on earth are we going to do? Like, what does this mean? Everything that we had planned, dreamed of, were thinking about doing, like, it's just like the rug is completely pulled from under you.
Welcome to You've Got Game, the podcast that's all about playing to win in life. I'm your host, Marisa Kamal, and I'm thrilled to be your guide on this journey. On this show, I'll be talking to a range of guests who faced adversity head on and come out on top. We'll be diving into their stories, uncovering the secrets of how they overcame their challenges, and learning from their hard-won wisdom. From entrepreneurs to artists, athletes to activists, our guests have one thing in common: they've got game. So come along for the ride as we explore the strategies, mindsets and habits of those who are thriving against all odds. Are you ready to play? Let's do this.
And welcome to You've Got Game. Today I've got Kim England to talk to, which is lucky for me and very lucky for you. So Kim is a world-class traveller, one of my best friends, a mum and VP of Global Communications for Pearson. Welcome, Kim. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Is this your first podcast?
My first podcast being interviewed. I've done a lot of podcasts where I've interviewed other people. So yeah, this is a little bit strange being on the other side.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the hot seat, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your story once again, but also from this perspective. So me and you met. I think you swam into my life in Thailand in
Quite
Koh
literally
Samui.
swam into your life.
Literally some 19 years ago, probably.
19 yeah.
19 years ago, which is
Does that make it old?
madness. I think it does. Don't say anything. And I'm delighted to have been part of your life for that amount of time. And there's been some real ups and downs. And I've been here whilst you've met your husband, you've had 2 kids, loads going on. Let's kick off. Can you just give me a bit what's your story?
So I think I was always really inspired by travel. We lived next door to this amazing woman. She ended up becoming my brother's godmother, and it was in the 80s. And she used to travel all over the world. Like she went to Australia, she went to the kibbutz, she went to sort of Thailand, but right at a time when it wasn't the sort of beaten track that we kind of knew when we went. But she used to send postcards, and I used to be in awe of the places that she went to, and had decided that at a very young age that was going to be my destiny. I was going to be somebody that would travel this big, huge, amazing world and see all these amazing places. And so I think I spent a lot of my time thinking and dreaming, how can I, get out of, I grew up in a little town called Newport Pagnell, like how can I get out and see sort of the big world? And so my first sort of foray into traveling was when I was 18. Instead of going to Magaluf with all my friends, my dad shipped me off to Canada, and I went and worked on a farm in the Rocky Mountains for 3 months, teaching kids to horse ride. And it was amazing. It was really hard work. Kids are hard work. Working on summer camps like that are hard work. Horses are also hard work. But it was really interesting because I met loads of people. I worked with a girl from Germany, and it really just opened my eyes up to there's this amazing world, and I really sort of had a thirst and hunger for that. But I then decided I should probably go to university because I had a gap year sort of between A levels and uni, and realised that there were a lot of closed doors without sort of a university degree. And so I was taking on jobs, but every time I was sort of trying to get a bit of a promotion, they just saw me as this 18-year-old girl, and I was like, this isn't gonna be sort of the best option for me. So I went off to university. felt a bit of pressure from my family. Certainly, my dad was very keen for me to go to uni. And I went to uni, but I didn't really have a plan. And to be honest, I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't love being at university. In fact, my last year, all I could think about was going backpacking. Like I was working and obviously studying, not studying as much as I probably should have, but just wanted to go traveling. And so that's what I did. Since I finished university, I went on my big trip, which is obviously where I met you. And I've had the travel bug ever since, and have continued to try and travel as much as possible. But when I came back from traveling, I realized I was like qualified for nothing. So I had this degree, but I didn't really know what could I do next. And I think, both my parents didn't really know what the corporate world was all about. I didn't really get great career advice. So I didn't know there was like graduate programs you could join. I was sort of just, in a bit of a, stopgap really. I was like, where do I go now? And I got this amazing opportunity to temp at BP. And the temp job turned into a permanent job. And then I just said yes to everything. So I was a team assistant and they wanted somebody to be on the employee network. I put my hand up. They needed somebody to be, the communication spokesperson. I was like, I'll put my hand up. And I did that. And I worked in Milton Keynes for 6 months. And then I got an opportunity to move to London. And I actually stayed with BP for 5 years. I worked for the integrated supply and trading arm of the business, and we were in Canary Wharf. And it was really, really great fun because I got to try lots of different things. I got to travel all over Europe, meet amazing people, work with really smart people. And that's where I really sort of fell into this sort of more communications side of my job. Weirdly, I did a communications degree, but they didn't touch on anything to do with what I do in a job. No PR, no corporate communications, nothing like that. So I did the Melkram black belt in communications, which was like a really great sort of grounding for all things employee communications. And that was, kind of where I was for a bit. And then there's an opportunity to take voluntary redundancy at BP. And there's a 20-something girl who had, some credit card debt. It was like a great solution to some of my problems until I then realized I actually did need to get another job. But the job at Pearson came along and it was just a perfect fix. It was an employee communications role. It was the first role where I'd be managing people. Had quite a big remit within sort of a part of Pearson. And I joined, loved it, and then, have continually reinvented my role and sort of changed what I do and evolved into different things over the last 15 years. As Pearson's changed as a company in 15 years. So I've never really stood still. And I've always had a philosophy for work, which is, if you don't trust the people you work with, or you're not enjoying your job, move on. And so it must say a lot about Pearson if in 15 years I've obviously stayed and hope to stay for many years to come, because I really do love what I do.
Wow, what an incredible career, and obviously travel history, which I know quite a lot about. So tell me, didn't you meet your husband in, was it Ibiza?
Yes, yeah, I did. So went on a girls' trip to Ibiza. I think we were like a bunch of misfits. I think there was like one person who was like the linchpin that knew everybody, and the rest of us all sort of, didn't necessarily know each other. And yeah, I met Rich in amnesia. Obviously, I didn't forget him. And then he was living in Nottingham, which actually I think was kind of the connection we had, because I went to university in Nottingham, and on my dad's side, there's a lot of family that live in Nottingham, so I've a lot of connection. So I think that's why we sort of ended up talking, and we had like a really old-fashioned relationship. Like he used to call me every night, and we'd speak, which was funny because now like no one uses their phone minutes, whereas we used to use all our minutes up talking to each other. And then, yeah, after like 6 months, I think maybe, he decided to come and live in London. He got a job in London, and then, yeah, the rest is history. We had 2 children. So we had Bilbo in 2013, and then we got married, and then we had Harrison in 2016. And then, lots of other things happened, which I'm sure you're going to talk about. And then we moved to Devon. So, yeah, we've been married, I should know this, 8 years this year. Yeah. And 13 years we've been together.
Wow,
Yeah.
13 years.
Yes.
I wonder how many love stories like that come out of Ibiza.
I don't know if it's probably like one of those urban myths. They met in Ibiza and are still together. But yeah, it's something obviously worked.
In my day, it became Tinder, and yeah, it worked for me.
I missed out on Tinder. I met Rich just before Tinder became a thing, a viable like way to meet somebody. But you know what? You can meet people in the most randomest of places, and sometimes meeting people in places that you're happy and you're in, enjoying life is probably not a bad place to be. Like, look at us, we were enjoying life, having the time of our life in Thailand, became friends. 19 years
Yeah,
later, we're on a podcast.
yeah, exactly. Crazy. Look, so I recall when your life changed forever, when your oldest boy, Bilbo, was diagnosed with leukemia. Can you talk a bit about that, and I guess how you felt and what went through? How did you support Bilbo with the transition?
It's a difficult subject to talk about because I have a huge, huge amount of mum guilt when I think about where we were when he got diagnosed. So essentially, I'd been sort of dipping in and out of volunteering with refugees. So in 2015, when the refugee crisis was kind of at its height in Germany, and the people were sort of coming up through Europe, through Greece, I had this kind of like epiphany as a mum that, what would I do if it was, me in that situation? I had this huge kind of, it was just almost like something got switched on, I couldn't switch it off. And so with a colleague, we sort of, became these like crazy women who set up a GoFundMe, and we drove a transit van 2,000 miles to Slovenia, and we were in Basice handing out water and aid and stuff. And when we came back, we were so kind of already in this world, we wanted to do more, and we decided to go to Greece. But in the transition between the two trips, I found out I was pregnant with Harrison. And so sort of, put a little bit of a pause on all that work. Obviously had Harrison. The refugee situation didn't get any better. And so in 2018, I decided to sort of reignite that passion that I had, and started to work with a collection of charities who were kind of on grassroots charities that were doing like really impactful work with refugees, sometimes working in partnership with the sort of bigger charities. And so, as well as having two small children, as well as having a job, I was doing this voluntary work. And so I went out to Greece in May. And then when I came back, we started this big project where we were doing dignity packs. So our house basically turned into like a collection spot. In fact, the Choose Love campaign had these different collection points, and we would have people like knocking on the door day and night, dropping bits and pieces off. And just before Bilbo was diagnosed, we literally had just started. The hallway had like boxes. One was like shampoo, one was shower gel, one was, sanitary products, because we were doing these dignity packs, which was part of sort of a big collective, and they were sending them out for women specifically in Greece. So I had all of that going on. I also had in sort of the month of October, well, Bilbo had started school in the September. I had been to New York twice. I'd had a innovation jam event in London. So there was just a lot happening. And in the midst of that, Bilbo was obviously, what, little did we know, was becoming very, very sick. And so the week before he started school, which would have been sort of mid-September, because they sort of do like a transition period, we'd been on holiday in Cornwall. And I have to say, like, that was when I started talking to the professionals about, when did it sort of start to happen or whatever, that was my point. I knew he was well, because we were in Cornwall, him and I were sneaking out, running on the beach before Harrison woke up, and he had like this insatiable energy. But slowly, sort of through September into kind of October, things sort of started to slow down. His birthday's at the beginning of October, so we'd gone away for a weekend. And I just remember him being really ratty, and me getting really angry with him, actually, like, because he just, sometimes when kids are just kind of a bit whiny and you're like, oh, it's your birthday. But he was, just quite tired. I remember like we were in Great Yarmouth, and we'd gone to this like massive dinosaur park, and my mum was like, oh, he seems to be really tired. And then everyone just kept saying to me, well, it's because he started school. And I kept thinking, yeah, he's fine. But then there was a part of me that kind of knew he wasn't fine, because he'd been at nursery since he was 9 months. So like, 9 till 5 nursery, 8:30 till 3 school. But it just really hard. And, with leukemia, it's difficult to see the signs, because so many of those first symptoms show up as, tiredness. So you can explain that away. Maybe they've got a virus, they've had a cold. Kids have got colds all the time. But it wasn't until I got home from the second work trip from New York. So I got back on the Friday morning, literally like got the taxi man. I was like, I need you to drive as quick as you can because I want to see the kids before they go to school. And like Rich opened the door and he just looked so pale and he had a massive bruise on his head. And I was like, what's happened? And, him and Harrison had bumped heads on the bed, they were bouncing about. And, Harrison's was like light, but Bilbo's was still quite prominent. And I just had that sort of feeling like something is way more serious, but I hadn't done anything about it. And so on the Sunday, I phoned 111 and I just said, look, I've got this really like weird feeling. Just want to take you through some of the sort of things that we've noticed. He's very tired, he's very pale, he's got bruising that's not going away. We sort of noticed that he had a couple of other bruises. I said, well, we need you to take him to a doctor tomorrow. And it was half term, so I took the whole week off because I had mum guilt. I was like, I need to, spend some time with Bilbo. And I remember I just had my handbag and a phone charger and my phone and went to the doctor. And she said, yeah, his spleen's enlarged. I mean, the doctor we saw was actually like a locum. It wasn't our regular doctor. She was amazing. She's like, I need you to go to the up to Milton Keynes. They've got like an assessment unit there. So we went in. And again, still, I was like, he's so going to just come out. He's got like a virus or whatever. So my mum phoned and she said, oh, do you want me to come up? Because I know like neither of you have eaten. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And Rich was staying with Harrison. So she was with me. Anyway, they said they wanted to cannulise him, which was the first of many times that I had to like hold a screaming child down whilst they get a cannula put in, which was, the sort of start of the trauma really of just seeing all these different things that happen to your child. And they started to sort of like flurry around the taken bloods. Anyway, they took me to one side and just said, look, we think we're going to have to take you to Oxford. We're probably going to blue light you there. Do you need to make arrangements? And I was like, well, what's going on? And they said, well, and they were just talking like a completely different language to me, like something to do with bloods and did it. I didn't mention anything to do with like cancer or leukemia at that point. But, now I know what they were talking about. You can put more things together, but like, you're not assuming the worst. So anyway, I drove home, had a shower, packed some stuff, talked to Rich, and he was like super positive, like it's going to be fine, like it won't be bad, he's probably got a virus, etc. Anyway, I got back and they'd moved Bilbo to right by the sort of nurses station, and my mum was like, they need to talk to you. And I was like, well, what's happened? And she's like, I don't know, but everyone is just rushing around. And she's like, I think it's serious. And so anyway, then the doctor was like, oh yeah, we'll take you into a room. And I don't know how I expected to be told my son had like cancer, but it wasn't how it happened. Like I thought they'd sort of like sit you down and like hold your hand, but this doctor just was like, yeah, your son's got leukemia and we need to get him to, and I was like what? And I think your world literally does just stop. And then I remember like he was talking at me, but I wasn't processing anything he was saying because all I could think about was, oh my God, I've got to go and tell my mum, and my mum is going to feel like this. And then I've got to tell Rich, and he's going to feel like, and, repeat to all our friends and family, because I literally just felt like the ground had swallowed me up. And, what on earth are we going to do? Like, what does this mean? Everything that we had planned, dreamed of, were thinking about doing, like, it's just like the rug is completely pulled from under you. And then I just went into total Kim mode, which is like, okay, well, what do we need to do? Like, let's focus on this and like, let's focus on what we can do. So like, the first thing they did is obviously like they packed us up because I knew my mum was distraught and I knew Rich was distraught. And I knew my mum had to get from the hospital to Rich. And I was like, just take a minute. Because I was thinking like, well, she's like has an accident because she's, crying or whatever. So anyway, I was like, text me as soon as you get to Rich. I obviously knew Rich. I mean, he'd said his legs had just gone from under him when I told him. So I was worrying about him. Then I was worried about Harrison. Anyway, we got to the hospital and, one of the doctors, actually the ambulance driver, I have to say, was amazing. He talked to me the whole way through to Oxford and just really helped just keep me completely calm. But we got to Oxford at about like 1 o'clock in the morning. And of course, then I started Googling stuff. And, you know, for anybody who gets cancer diagnosis, that is the worst thing you can do for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's not your journey. Like, everyone's journey is different. The statistics are statistics. Like, everyone's, you know, anomalies and different, and there's so many different cancers. And so don't do that. But like, obviously you start Googling things like, you know, will my son survive? What happens? What does this mean? Etc. etc. Survival rates. And it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm in a hospital chair. What else can I do? So while we were waiting, you know, to figure out what was happening next. So then, like, the next few days were just a complete blur. So they put us on the Cameron ward in Oxford, and it's just the most bizarre thing, because you are like and it's very different through COVID. So I can't even imagine what that must have been like. But for us, because obviously it was pre-COVID, it's just a revolving door. It's doctors, it's consultants, it's nurses. They're taking blood. They're like the bleeping machines going off because he was having to be pumped full of fluids. You've got Young Lives v Cancer come in to talk to you about, you know, how they can support you, which at that time you're like, great, but I don't know what support I need. You know, Rich's mum and stepdad came down. My brother flew over from Germany. You know, my mum was there. You know, we're constantly needing stuff. Like, you don't know your way around the ward, but suddenly you're on this ward with like, and all these sick children. Like, I remember that was the thing that for me, I hadn't really computed my child was one of those sick children. But like, you're on the ward with all these children who have lost their hair, have just come back from bone marrow transplants. Like, some of the kids have been there for like months, and you're like, this is who we are now. Like, it's a really, really strange situation to be in. And so again, taking charge, I was like, how on earth are we gonna navigate this? We've got so many friends, family, work colleagues. They were already like, the people that we had told, it was like someone would message me, someone would WhatsApp me, someone would text me, and I was said to Rich, I cannot cope. We just keep repeating over and over and over what's going on. So in sort of 6 to 12 months lead up to before Bilbo got cancer, we'd started this travel blog called Godless Travel, and it was supposed to be all about our sort of travels all over the world. We'd put our trip to Thailand, where, you know, we'd taken the kids, and we'd put a few other trips and places that we'd been to. And I said, do you know what? I'm just going to start writing what's going on there. And actually, those first 4 days in hospital, it was one of the best things I could do, because I literally would just download everything that had happened. It would sort of process in my head. And then I was like, oh, okay. Like, it was almost like writing a diary. And that's what I did. And I did that, you know, pretty religiously every couple of days, talking through the different stages. And I say to people, if you want to know what's going on, it's there. If you've got questions, don't mind answering your questions. Like, I'm not going to hide anything. If you've got like a kind of bit of a weird question or you're curious, just ask, and I'll put it all there. And the other thing it became really useful for is people were like, what can we do to help? I mean, people wanted to raise money for us, which I have to say was like the weirdest, most uncomfortable position to be in, because like, someone set up a GoFundMe, which, you know, I'm incredibly grateful for. But I was like, we don't need money. Like, Rich and I were both in jobs where, you know, we got sick pay, so it's like we weren't going to be out of pocket. So that was kind of a bit weird, but I understand it, because what people wanted to do was something. They didn't know how to help us, so they just set up a GoFundMe. So we ended up donating that money to the Henry Allen Fund, which is a fantastic charity in Milton Keynes that helped us immensely. And actually what we did was we set up 2 other ways that people could help. So first of all, we said, go give blood, because Bilbo was literally going through gallons of the stuff. Like, you know, he was having to have blood transfusions, and he was having to have like all sorts of different the other blood that you have to get, the yellow stuff, I can't remember, it's just going out of my head now, the gold stuff that stops them from bruising. And then we also set up a GoFundMe page for Young Lives v Cancer. So the money didn't come to us, it went straight to Young Lives v Cancer, and we've raised, you know, on that particular page, I think £12,000, but we've also done loads and loads of different like events since. And I think in Bilbo's fund, I think we've done about £20,000. And so that was really useful, because people who felt like they wanted to do something could then obviously donate the money or give blood. And I would say, you know, if you don't give blood, because it's an amazing way that you can help people, not just people that have got cancer. And similarly, being on the donor register, because, you know, doing a bone marrow transplant, you know, can literally save a life. And the more people that are on the bone marrow transplant, sort of the better. So that's kind of how we dealt with those sort of first few days. After that, it was like day by day. I mean, you lived and breathed it. We had good days, we'd really dark bad days. But yeah, I probably did treat it very much like a project. I was organised. I mean, even when my mum and I got home, I had like boxes. I remember the dignity pack stuff. I phoned the team and said, when we get home, I can't deal with that. And one of my dear friends, Angus, he just came with the van, just took it all away. So when I came home, it was just all gone. I remember going home from the hospital for a shower, and I said to my mum that this can't be here when we get back. And so they took care of that. And so that was like my refugee kind of involvement was over for a bit. But yeah, I was like, right, I was on Amazon, you know, we need to get this, because, you know, with it's awful. Cancer is such an icky situation. Like, you know, Bilbo was very sick, so we used to have like, you know, sick bowls in every car. We used to have like, you know, the pads just in case like he was being sick, so you could just like lay them out. You know, you never knew what was going to happen in terms of like how he would feel. We had to buy, I mean, he was on steroids, so he literally put on like 14 pounds in 4 weeks. It was just the most heartbreaking thing to see. He just blew up, like his face went all moon phase. You know, his legs were rubbing together. I was struggling to get in the car. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, after coming off the steroids, he was down to being like ridiculously underweight. And we were talking to dietitians about putting like full fat cream in milkshakes to fatten him up, like a sort of, you know, diversity of like what happens sort of throughout the treatment was just insane. But I just kept focused.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing journey that you've been on. And, you know, when I think back to like everything that you did for refugees was just incredible. And I remember your trip and being totally moved by it. And then I remember all the pictures of the stuff, like your house was literally taken over, you know. But then obviously when this happened, it's like you got to go into survival mode for your family and do what's right for you guys. And having all of that stress in your house at the same time when you're trying to settle Bilbo would just be like impossible. But I remember when I saw you just shortly after you received the diagnosis, and at the time it was incredibly like sad for you, and you know, and now when I think about it as a mum, it's like a whole new perspective. Like I cannot even, it doesn't even bear thinking about, does it, when you think about it for your own child, or now just having that
No,
experience of having
because the hard
something that
thing about having
yeah.
kids is they're going to be in pain. And if they're in pain, you're in pain. And a lot of the time, if they're in pain, there's literally nothing you can do about it. Like, you know, our kids are going to have their hearts broken. They're going to, you know, have things in their life that are going to challenge them, because you only have to look at your own life to think about all the things where you've been, you know, my life has come to an end because, you know, you've fallen out with your best friend or all that sort of stuff. But this is so different. And you just feel like if you could take that pain away from them and go through it yourself, you would, but you can't. And then like you also put yourself in a really difficult situation in terms of like the relationship you have with them, because you're having to do things that are really horrible. Like I remember in the hospital, it was like it was all taken care of by like the nurses and the doctors. I remember them taking me into a room and saying, like, here's all the medicine. And I was like, okay, well, what happens now? And they're like, well, we're going to discharge you. And I was like, well, we've got to go home. And they had this like, you know, all this protocol of all these medicines. And some of them were disgusting. Like they were really gross. I mean, very quickly, Bilbo learned how to take tablets, which was a massive bonus. But until he got to that point, I was like, so we've got to give this to him. And they were like, yeah. And then so like you're bribing them, you're telling them this is, you know, I mean, I never ever lied to Bilbo. We were always so honest with him. And he'd say, is that going to be disgusting? And I'll be like, yeah, it's absolutely minging, but you've got to take it because you've got to get better. Like, this is the medicine that's going to make you better. But I never say to him things like, oh, it doesn't taste that bad, because it did. It was horrid. So you sort of negotiating. every single day. And like things that nearly broke me was the food. I mean, in the beginning, it was like he just couldn't stop eating. I mean, I remember being in IKEA having their breakfast. He's literally tucking into like, what is it, a 13-piece breakfast or 10-piece breakfast. He's licking his lips and he's talking about what he's going to have for lunch. And you're like, what's happened to my child? And the steroids really mask the behavior as well. Like they're horrible on steroids. The rage is like unbelievable. Bilbo's a very gentle, he's very much like Rich. He's not high strung like me. And to see him so angry and so sad as well, because he didn't understand why he was so angry and, hitting us and thrashing and, oh, it was awful. And then because you've got Harrison witnessing like this complete transformation of his brother, he didn't understand what was going on. I mean, I worry for what he had to sort of witness at such a young, impressionable age, because he was 2. It's just completely bizarre. And then, after that, it turned out there was this particular drug that he was on called 6-MP, which he had in various different stages. But unfortunately, it's the one he was going to have every day during maintenance, and it made Bilbo sick. So I used to write everything down, and I was the one that was noticing his patterns. I kept saying to doctors, that drug is making him sick. And they're like, well, it doesn't normally make the kids sick. I was like, it's that one. It definitely is. So we sort of worked around getting this like anti-sickness that would work with him. But actually what was really frustrating is that it just made him like a little bit nauseous, but like not full-blown sick. So just that kind of like, the way I sort of figured it might be is like when you get morning sickness, you just don't really fancy anything. When you do eat something, it doesn't taste. And because I had that with both my boys, I'd sort of tried to explain that to Bilbo, and he's like, yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. Well, he had that for 3 years because he was obviously on maintenance for 3 years. And so we did manage it, but like the amount of times we would be like, what do you want to eat? Don't know. Okay, and then I'd make something and then he'd try it and then it didn't taste good. And then, we'd be in restaurants and then he'd try something. And then like food just became this like just constant battle. And then Harrison started picking up some of the same behaviors. So he would start playing around with what he liked and what he didn't like. And honestly, at one point, that was what nearly like just 3.5 years of that.
Yeah, I bet.
I can't cope
Yeah.
with this anymore. Like it's just enough. Like it's just too much. And then he got really like, well, that was part of it. And then the last year he really struggled. Like I think his body had just kind of had enough of the chemo and the anti-sickness and everything, and his body started falling apart. So he was getting like his skin was peeling from his fingers. He had like this horrible like infection and rash all around his mouth. I mean, at one point he couldn't go to school. He couldn't pull his trousers up. And I was like, you can't send him to school if he can't even like go to the toilet and pull his trousers up. He was in pain. We had like 6 different steroid creams for his hands. That was traumatic. Every night I was having to like pin him down. And to be honest with you, I don't even think any of the creams were working. That was like the worst bit. It's like you're trying all these things, but you're never really sure if any of them are doing anything. Kept getting infections. We kept going back to the hospital. Obviously, by this point, we'd moved to Devon. The Milton Keynes Hospital was like literally 7 minutes from our house. Exeter, like an hour. We made that decision, and it's, now we don't have to go to the hospital all the time. It's great. But like, I remember going to the hospital in the middle of the night because Bilbo had been coughing up blood. We thought he was really sick. It's actually where he had the infection in his mouth. He'd been sick, but the blood was obviously where he'd like cut his mouth. So we're like in this massive panic, get in the car, and I realise like the petrol light is on. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I realised like it's not Milton Keynes, like there's no 24-hour BP petrol station. I can't just swing into like Tesco's and do the card one that you don't even have to go into the shop. Like I was driving around Newton Abbot trying to find a petrol station. I was like, oh my God, like why do we live in the country? And then, we finally got to the airport, to the hospital, and I wishful thinking I was going to an airport. And we couldn't find our way into the entrance because it was like the middle of the night. Yeah, it was probably not the best time. And then in the end, like we were working towards this like massive date that was going to be his official, finish date. And it turned out they called us a week before and just said, stop, like he's done. Like you had another infection, like 1 more week of like chemo is not going to make any difference at this point. He's fine. So we were like, what? Because I was expecting like, I'll give him his last tablet and we'll have this like big fanfare. And it just wasn't like that at all. But then we were like, done. It's
Yeah.
over. Except it's not over, but that bit of it's over.
How did that feel for you all as a family when you got that message? How did you react and internalize
Well,
it?
weirdly, Rich and I'd gone away for the weekend, so my mum had the boys. So I was like, oh, mum ended up giving him his last chemo. And to be honest, I think I spoke to a lot of mums and dads about this and also spoke to the consultants. And I think you are so focused on the end date, like it becomes all consuming. And actually, when you get there, it's a real anticlimax because it's not really the end date because you've got like the last lumbar puncture and you've got the last chemo. But even when they stop chemo, they still have to have the weekend antibiotics for like 3 months, and they've got to have all their he's had to be re-immunized. So it's almost just like that point is almost like a milestone. And actually, we didn't even ring the bell until I think it was like in the summer sometime. Like he finished treatment in the March. We did have like a party in April for like our friends and family where we sort of had our own bell and everything because COVID, you couldn't really have lots of people in the hospital and stuff. And then I remember the team at Exeter saying, "Oh, like you haven't rang the bell," and it was really weird. I felt like we couldn't really ring the bell properly until like we were sort of really finished, and it didn't feel like we were finished until like all of the sort of drugs had stopped, and we weren't still going and having like the 2 weekly or monthly appointments and stuff. So that we sort of delayed that, and actually in some ways I'm glad we did because I think Bilbo felt quite overwhelmed at the end as well. So much attention was on him, especially like at the end of treatment party. He was not into that at all. But there's a poem that you can read, and I said, "Do you want to read it?" And he was like, "No." And to be honest, what was really lovely about that was he just said, "I just want to ring the bell and go back and play football." And I remember thinking, yeah, do you know what? That's exactly what you should be doing. He hadn't been able to play football for the whole of his treatment because he kept getting these infections in his toes. And I was like, actually, you playing football like a completely normal child. I mean, I know everyone wanted to see him ring the bell, and that was kind of for everybody that had supported us and helped us. But that was the best bit, was the fact that he could, start being normal, if there is such a thing as normal.
Yeah. Well, he was so young when he started. If you think 3.5 years of his life as well, it's like a big chunk, isn't it? And like proportion wise, like half his life. And also just like
Yeah,
the growth that happens within that time.
yeah, and people used to say things like, "Oh, how is he coping and stuff?" And I'd be like, "Do you know what? He doesn't know any different." I tell you, the part that really broke my heart was, I think it was about a year. I think we were sort of like 6 months from the end. And one of the things I used to quite often do, Bill, was I'd sit on his bed and we'd talk. And I always used to say to him, "You want to talk about anything?" And he's quite a chatty little kid. And, it's normally start with like, "This happened at school." And then, sometimes that's where some of the things about how he was feeling. And he was talking about feeling sad. And I said, "Why are you being sad?" And he said, "I really don't want Harrison to get cancer." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he just assumed that because he'd had cancer, Harrison was going to get cancer. And I was like, oh my God. And like, my rule is I won't lie to them. So I can't say he won't get cancer because I have absolutely no idea. 1 in 14, is it? Or I looked this stat up because I wanted to, 1 in 500 children can develop cancer by the age of 14. So I can't say he will never get it because that's not strictly true. But the chances of him getting it is highly unlikely. But I was like, is that what's going through his head? Like, worrying that his brother will have to go through sort of what he's gone through, because the reality for him is like when you get to 5 years old you get cancer. It's like totally bizarre. So yeah, I mean, he was amazing. He was really, I mean, kids are resilient and then they don't know any better. And I have to say, like, the cancer doctors and nurses are phenomenal. Like, it's a really bizarre day when your kid says, I don't want to go home, when you're on like the oncology ward, because they're just having so much fun, because they make it such a
Yeah.
fun and happy place to be. And you build relationships with the teams there, and you build relationships with the other families. I've made some amazing friends, on the wards. So it's like such a bizarre, like weird place to be in. It's like you're really enjoying yourself, but like you're like, reality check, we're on an oncology ward. But that's such an important part of like helping the kids get through, whatever it is that they're going through at that given moment in time. But yeah, I mean, I think it will affect Bilbo for the rest of his life, but I like to think it will have a positive impact on his life. And same for Harrison, right? Like, they've both learned a lot of empathy. They've seen so many other sick children. They also know the reality that not all children make it through cancer. There's been children that we've known, over the last sort of, well, we're getting up to 5 years now, that, didn't make it. Or, the Henry Allen Trust is an amazing charity, but it was started because, Dawn lost Henry to neuroblastoma. And so we talk a lot about Henry and who Henry is, and how much he meant to Dawn, and how much Dawn is now doing for other children with cancer. So they understand the realities too, and I think kids can cope with that sort of real talk.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Just the like, yeah, just amazing the resilience that they show and built. It's like going through a journey that literally molds you like that at such a young age. It's horrendous, but the strength and courage that comes through is also quite amazing. Do you, we'll wrap up shortly, but do you see your lives as pre and post cancer? And I guess, what does the post cancer look like for you, or how's your perspective changed?
I have changed. Like, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I had no choice. I mean, that's the thing I think that's really interesting. Like, people say, "Oh, you're so brave," or like, "You're so inspiring," and don't get me wrong. That, like, I'm glad that people say that, because I wrote the blog for a reason. I wanted to inspire and help people. Like, one of the posts that's most popular on there is, how can you support a family, going through cancer? Because I do think it's a real like grey area for people. Like, how do you help a family? Like, what can you do? And every family is different, right? So from that perspective, I'm glad that hopefully I was inspiring, but I didn't have a choice. This wasn't something that Rich and I could like opt in or opt out of. We had to just crack on. And so I am different. I definitely sweat the small stuff a lot less. I have so little tolerance for some people and things that they kind of go on about. And it's awful, because I think one of the things that I've learned through cancer is, you do not know what's going on in other people's lives, right? You don't know what goes on behind closed doors. You don't know, the stress levels that people have, and their reality is their reality, right? Like, we all have a different perspective on life because we walk in our own shoes. But I do sometimes hear other parents sort of talking about, their kids triggered by this and triggered by that. And I think, seriously, like, from, two different perspectives that I look through life. One is, my son had cancer. The other is the refugee kids that, I've seen in Greece, who they've been through war. They've been on boats where, they could have died. They now live in refugee camps. They're going to have, challenges for most of their life because of some level of discrimination. And yet a lot of them go on to do amazingly awesome things and are brilliant human beings. I mean, sometimes I think we are mollycoddling children and wrapping them in cotton wool, and I don't know whether that will be good for society in the long run. And I think, if we're going to live in a world that's got COVID, that's got, financial uncertainty, we're all going to have some level of resilience, right? So I do sort of see the world sort of through very much like, what else can you throw at me? I touch wood, by the way.
Yeah, don't.
Like, if you've been to the worst depths of like what can happen with, your family and life, then you think, well, okay, then this, event I've got to deliver next week, or this thing I've got to do at work, or this conversation I've got to have, like, it's not going to be that. The conversation I had with my husband telling him my son had cancer is way worse than any conversation I can possibly have at work. And I say to my team as well, like, we work in PR, not ER. So if we, don't get something done or something slightly out of, no one dies. But I think, I am different from that perspective. And also, I still have a lot of empathy. Like I've seen a completely different world. And that's maybe also helps me understand a little bit about what other people are going through.
Mm.
You don't know what's going on behind closed doors. And some people aren't like me. They don't share what's going on with the world. There are other people that I know that have been on, different cancer journeys or, different health journeys, and they don't tell everybody what's going on. We made that decision because I just knew it'd be easier in the long run and it helped my mental health. But you have no idea what's going
Yeah.
on. Well, I mean, I listened to your podcast and you had all the stuff going on with Paloma, and it wasn't that easy for you, and I could have probably done more for you in that time. I was kind of a little bit
No.
I had a lot going on too. But
Not at
you
all.
know what I mean? It's hard,
Yeah.
isn't it?
It's just, I think I agree with you. It's just so important to maintain perspective. When you start fretting about stuff, it's like, what is life literally about? Is that deadline more important to me than X? And like, I think once you figure out like your purpose and your values and what you stand true to, that's the most important thing. I love hearing your
Yeah.
perspective. Thank you so much for coming. I have one last question. So, as you know, the podcast is called You've Got Game, and it's all about people that have overcome adversity and are now thriving. I can see you've got game. I can see Richard's got game. Harrison's got game. And of course, Bilbo has game. But can you tell me, just summarize why you've got game?
Oh, that's a tough question. I know I did give this some thought. I think I've got game because if you tell me something's going to be difficult, if you tell me I can't do something, then it's almost like it sets a fire in me that I kind of need to prove you otherwise. So I'm not a competitive sports person because I'm rubbish at sports. But I think anything else in life, if you tell me I can't do it, I'm like, let me show you I can. And so I think that's why I've got game. So whether that's, stuff that happens with the kids, stuff that happens in our family life, when I was doing the refugee stuff, they were just wanting my money. I was like, no, you need more than that. No, 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 no. Well, then now you've made me want to do it even more, kind of thing. So yeah, I think I've got game because if you tell me no, you light a fire.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that. And I can also see it in your like top strengths as well. Like, the way that you use them, woo, strategic, communication, individualization, and arranger. Like all of that is
I
like
mean,
the perfect
it's a
combo
powerful
for that.
combination.
Yeah, it's a powerful combination. But you definitely know how to get the job done in
I
all
do.
situations, and you play to that. Look,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And I hope, well, I know that people listening to this in situations similar to yours or otherwise will kind of empathize, but also take so much from this conversation. So I really appreciate your honesty and the way that you've approached it with such openness and kindness. Thank you. I will share your details and, of course, your blog as well will come up on the screen. So anyone that wants to read it, I recommend it. I obviously follow the journey so closely on that and directly with you. So anyone going through something similar or has a friend that's experiencing something, I really do recommend Kim's blog. It's amazing. It's obviously very sad, but it's a really
It had a happy ending.
yeah, it does have a happy ending. It does have a happy ending, which is the main thing. And Bilbo's an absolute rock star. So
Yeah,
yeah,
very proud of him.
thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Bye.
Bye.